There we go. The one thing I forgot to do was to make sure my mic was working. Hello, everyone out in the stream audience today, and people in the future watching this archived on our channel. Welcome back to another Cartoonist cooperative Pride stream. Last time we did a roundtable about genre. This time we're doing a roundtable about character creation. Today with me I have, did you all want to introduce yourselves? Go Ashley, Julian, and then Pim.
Sure.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Ashley. I am a cartoonist and art educator based out of New Jersey, and I make the webcomic Obelisk that is about lesbian vampires.
Hello, I'm Julian Cormac. I'm a comic artist and sometimes writer based out of Massachusetts. I do a bunch of things, mainly comics, sometimes game development, but currently my big thing is I am working on a graphic novel with my partner Arden Ripley entitled The Vow. It is a T for T, enemies to enemies with benefits, erotic, high fantasy horror story coming to Kickstarter soon.
Hi, I'm Pim. I draw comics and I do some writing, and I have a webcomic called We Go Together, which is about two friends kind of in a surreal world.
And I'm Nero O'Reilly. I'm one of the founders of the cooperative benefits manager website guy, general busybody about town. I also do webcomics. You can find my current publicly running one, Ultraviolence, at uv.itsnero.com, about two men who are terrible for each other.
Yay.
Excellent.
Yippee! So like I said at the top, this time for our roundtable, we're gonna be talking about queerness and character creation, kind of how our own identities and preferences influence the kind of characters that we make, and just the general the shape of our stories around these characters as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one. It's something that I spend a lot of time thinking and chewing over as someone who writes both like sometimes in contemporary settings and just like totally made from the ground up fantasy.
Oh, and real quick, if someone wanted to get a round of pronouns real quick. Mine are he, him.
Oh, mine are they, them.
They, them, any?
Mine are she, her.
Excellent. I can see them in Discord, so I always forget the audience can't. But yes, you were saying, Julian?
Oh yeah, this is another one that I've been super excited to talk about, like just because like it's something that I spend a lot of time sort of chewing over, like writing both in sometimes contemporary settings and sometimes like fantasy settings where you get to kind of decide from the ground up like what queerness looks like. Sort of like how like to write that in a way that is like how that will be read and received to people who are living in the real world and reading that fiction.
Yeah.
I feel very similarly. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
I feel really similarly with like doing a lot of historical fiction. There's a lot of like bridging the gap between how we talk about things and identify now, and finding a lot of previously unknown to me information about like our queer past. It's very cool.
Yeah,
I love that.
I feel like with my webcomic, I do mostly, it's very surreal stuff that is not based in, like, it makes sense, it makes, like, dream sense. So, when I put themes in it about, it's like, it's there if you look for it, but I don't state anything outright, which I'm thinking about doing, but it's like, none of the characters all the characters use they them in my like image description and stuff. So it's like it's something I keep in mind, but it's also not something I totally think about directly a lot.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's super interesting to me, which we can bring us into our first question, since we have a set of kind of jumping off topics here. What makes a character feel inherently kind of queer to you? Is it because it's made by you, or is that something you think about consciously at all?
Yeah, I think it's pretty unconscious to me. Like when like recently Art Fight is starting up, and I was putting up characters and like going through other people's characters because I really love Art Fight. But I just noticed, I was like, oh, I never really put what is it called, like some people usually put like the little bio of like, oh, sexuality and like different traits and stuff, and I never end up putting that on. And I don't know if that's because I don't inherently think about it, or if I'm used to like just changing it up like whenever I want, or like, yeah.
Yeah, it's something that, I don't know, I'm realizing that I think my default for character writing is probably queerness, like just because that like, especially like as someone who tends to like work in like more erotic spaces in terms of comics and things, like I tend to be more drawn to like depicting relationships that sort of fall outside of like a typical like cis-het purview. And I really gotta say is, I think a lot of the time, like if I'm writing a straight relationship, it's probably because like the straightness is like sort of the point of the thing that I want to draw attention to, like something that I'm saying about what I think of heterosexuality. So I'm not sure.
I tend to feel that way. Like even when I have straight characters, I feel like there's a little something about them that I'm coming from the perspective of being a queer person and being a lesbian. So it's very much like that's influencing all of my characters, even if I'm not specifically writing them as queer. I also have a lot of like, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I feel about my characters versus how they might talk about themselves. Because like my comic takes place in 1908, which we had a very different view of sexuality and, you know, identifying yourself at the time. And I have another work in progress that's in the 50s. So even between those two things, it's, you know, a lot to balance, and it kind of, I feel like it gives me a better understanding of my characters, or it makes me sit with like how would they identify, and how I want to portray that without them, you know, directly saying I am this, which they wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah, that sounds like a struggle I definitely relate to, because I think I want to write more aromanticism and like asexuality into stuff, but usually I'm like, that's kind of an absence of a thing, so usually it doesn't come up, and I'm just like, I don't know if I should make this more clear yet, or yeah.
Actually, what you were saying about like thinking about how characters identify specifically in the context of Obelisk, that makes a lot of sense to me, especially like, reminds me a bit of like, so in my own comic, it's a fantasy setting, but like there are not like a lot of terms that like we sort of use as common parlance like now just don't really exist. Like that, I don't think we've like hammered out if like a word for gay exists exactly. Like there is a term for excuse me, for people who are like what would be like, we would probably consider like non-binary or third gender or something. Like the in-universe term for that is just androgynes, because like a lot of stuff is pulling from Latin. But like just the way it sort of it forcibly shifts your perspective on the character when you think about like, okay, but how do they like define and relate to themselves, I think is like a very interesting thorny thing to pick around, like working with queerness, especially because I feel like so much of like how does this character relate to their own self and their relationships to others is a really big question to address anyway if you're writing any type of queer character.
Yeah, I really love seeing like how it's tackled in like fantasy settings in particular, because I'm so accustomed to working in some form of real life setting that like seeing how people shape it from the ground up and like make it have a history or like a conlang thing in that world is very, very cool.
Yeah, it's something that's like, it kind of just like has infinite possibilities, so it's a little bit scary but also exciting in that way. Like the concept of like in the same universe, like for example, like the concept of being cisgender doesn't really like exist in the same way that it does for us, because people like often are born with like a mix of primary and secondary sexual characteristics that doesn't really like quote unquote naturally occur in like real life. So the idea of like being like born a woman or whatever just does not apply in the same way. So it's inventing a lot of stuff from first principles in a way that is weird but also very fun to play with. And it also kind of throws a wrench into what like can make a character feel queer in that sort of scenario, because I think thinking more about it, like the idea of like a character feeling queer, whether it's like one I'm writing or reading, does depend more on like how they like express and relate like both their own self and in a community, regardless if it's like in a relationship context, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. And for one thing I always find interesting with like queerness in media that isn't contemporary, which like I deal in a lot of like either like contemporary or horror stuff, but like stuff that is historical or fantasy or otherwise, the way that characters describe themselves is so dependent on the world building as well. And like queerness to me personally usually has like an air of being very against the mainstream. So kind of seeing what qualifies as mainstream in a certain fictional or historical kind of like society also reflects like a lot about the world itself. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think sometimes that that occurs to me, and I'm just like, the things that I write end up kind of being like I just start at default as this is an accepted and normal thing. So I don't necessarily write like the struggle that comes with it, or sometimes I'm like, maybe I should, but also sometimes I just want to write a world where everything is like better, I guess.
No, exactly, where it's like you don't necessarily want to write about the struggle, or like you want this to be mainstream in your own work. Like the webcomic I do now, Ultraviolence, like all of the characters are some form of trans or gay, and it's like in my mind I also call it like the yaoi world problem, where like everybody is like a gay dude just automatically. But it's like, yeah. But it's like with that, what really counts as mainstream if you're viewing it through just the eyes of these kind of select characters too.
Yeah, true. I think sometimes you gotta also, yeah, you gotta have that kind of world sometimes too, where it's just like, I'm gonna escape the troubles of the real world and just have this.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, Pim, what you're saying about like sometimes wanting to just work in a space where like characters like queerness is not like shaped or like outlined by like the fact that they are struggling resonates a bit, because I find that like a lot of the time it is easier for me to sort of like pick up and like kind of have a more immediate resonance with characters that experience things that I can sort of like map onto in that way, but also like there's plenty of fiction that I have enjoyed where that's just like not like a thing that the characters have to be concerned about. Like thinking for example about like, I don't know, Richard Seekins like poetry about like being a gay man and the way that he writes about like the specific like texture and experience of like being a man who is attracted to men, and sometimes like the fraughtness of that lived experience is very resonant. But also, for example, I really love like Land of the Lustrous, which like their problems are not because of their gender. Like that's all just them them causing trouble.
Yeah, I don't know if that's specifically, my stuff kind of ends up leaning towards that kind of depiction of queerness. I think is because I grew up reading a lot of fan fiction where, like, obviously there is stuff out there that talks more about, like, the struggles and, like, the problems you run into, but, like, I feel like a lot of fan fiction is also just they focus more on, like, the personal drama between the characters. So I end up when I write stuff, it's, I guess, more about that. Yeah.
I relate very hard to getting into all of it through fanfiction.
Same.
Yeah, same.
The gateway drug. Yeah, I've had a lot of, like, a big part of a lot of my work has been kind of riding the line between wanting to acknowledge, like, the difficulties or struggles of, like, different queer people and especially queer women in, like, earlier periods of history, but it's also a lot of pointing at that history and going, we were here and we weren't invented at Stonewall, and, like, people had happy lives. It wasn't all, being oppressed, which is very much like a narrative we tend to have about all of it. So it's neat to feel like we need both.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Sometimes you just want to start with the baseline of, like, okay, all of these characters, like, we have other things to do, but we're also queer.
The world is ending. There are other worries.
Yeah. So relatedly, like the outside of, like, just kind of how the characters act, since this is also kind of about character creation, how does this kind of thing reflect in design for you folks? Like their visuals, their aesthetics.
That's a good question as well. Like, I think I, like, again, by default, tend to design characters who are at least a little fruity looking, just because that's, like, the type of thing that I just, like, I just enjoy. I just enjoy drawing characters who, like, tend to, like, be at least a little bit gender non-conforming, or, like, I will, like, ornament them with, like, for example, like, things that I find cool that might be fun to wear, or things that I just think would be interesting to draw, which very frequently ends up blurring gender lines. Like, there have been times where I sort of had to kind of, like, walk it back a little bit to think more about, like, how a character would be presenting in a certain context and things like that, because I was just like, yeah, this is, like, a normal amount of fur ruff for a cisgender man to be rocking.
This just looks neat.
You gotta have a ruff.
Just a little ruffle.
Yeah, I think I mean, in my webcomic, if the drawing is rough, it's like it's got the cartoon quality where it's like, how what is it? Winnie the Pooh doesn't have pants and you don't really notice. It's like it's very basic. So I think in character design, I'm not sure if that, like, is part of it much.
Yeah, it's interesting because kind of like the I feel like the kind of quote unquote lack of is also a statement on its own.
Yeah. Like, I still distinctly remember once when I was working on, like, some character design stuff for the VOW, like, really early on, I was talking to Arden and I was like, oh, I think it would be really fun to, like, have this character wearing kind of, like, high-heeled type boots in this situation, but I think that might be kind of, like, impractical, so I'm going to be paring stuff down a bit, and they were like, no, the practical doesn't matter, like, we want this to be kind of, like it should be serving, basically, like, it, like, sort of the thing of just, like, it like works for the character and it says something about them, and also does kind of, like, add a little bit of that, like, sort of ambient queerness to their overall presentation, because this character is also, like, generally, like, I use the term, like, kind of, like, butch, like, from the neck up, in that they are very, like, typically butch in their, like, relationships with other people and how they think about themselves and the role they prefer to be in relationships, but otherwise, like, don't really, like, care as much about like presentation. Like they will be a little more dressy at times, but it's like that specific thing of like the contrast of like, oh yeah, I want this character to be like kind of like emotionally like a very like butchy like mask type, but also will rock heels.
That does sound like a very cool character.
I love them already.
Thank you.
A lot of the stuff with character creation for me, or specifically the design, does come down to clothing. I spend so much time like staring at different historical pieces and learning about like how the silhouettes worked and underpinnings, and there's so much to be said about like we had an even more stringent gender system with clothing in certain ways back in the day, and like how the characters mess around with that and ornament themselves or style themselves and like find their gender expression, and kind of how I think of my character design a lot in terms of like costumes. Like I am designing a costume for a character in a story, kind of like in movies or TV. So there's this element of like, you know, I'll have a lot of thought about their everyday wear, but then I leave room for, we have a lot of weird dream sequences where I can put a character in some crazy 1700s court dress and think of what they would have presented themselves as back then. And I get into a lot of how lesbians and like butch women would dress in a period before we really had that language, and what that looked like and how they might have signaled to each other.
Yeah, just like disclosure, I've been following Obelisk like by RSS feed for a while now, and I'm just now having the realization of like, oh, there's definitely like at least a solid amount of costuming stuff that is probably kind of going over my head, because a lot of the time I'm just like, wow, she's really hot. That's
the important part.
I'm a mark. I love butch vampires.
I have found my audience. Thank you.
But yeah, like the historical costuming goes so nutty with it. It's like both like kind of fascinating and horrifying in ways, like in the sense of like how restrictive and repressive things in certain periods of time and still are in a lot of ways, but also like the ways that you can sort of subvert that are also a really fascinating space to play with.
Yeah, I've had a lot of, you come up against
like I'm thinking about, I don't know that much about historical costuming, but my partner, for example, like hates Greta Gerwig's Little Women because they were like, that scene where you can see that the girls are wearing Ugg boots when they're walking through that field, I can't stand it.
I have incredibly serious opinions about like period dramas doing clothing or like especially corsets wrong, but that is a subject for a different panel.
Oh yeah, I feel like the historical like costuming stuff is so intimidating to me. Like every once in a while I'll see a post that talks about like how specifically like design was popular in like certain time periods, and I was like, this is so cool, but also I'm so intimidated.
It is truly a rabbit hole of like, the moment you start uncovering, like you can look at what the clothing physically looks like from the outside, and then you start digging into like, there's so many things about like the structure of their underwear or the fabric that it was made out of. And I mean, that's to tie it back into the subject. It is a very fun thing to play around with. Corsetry was a thing for both men and women. That fell out of favor for men a little sooner, but like how much of our gender expression through clothing has changed. Like high heels used to be menswear, and everyone would wear makeup in a certain echelon of society.
So it's really neat to explore.
Yeah, like,
Plus, I was gonna say also the just the differences between kind of like outerwear, like formal wear, and then just like casual wear too. Historically, is all like there. You're right. It is an absolute rabbit hole to go down.
This when you're telling me this, I'm like, I need to not ask questions because that isn't what the stream is about. And also,
we can do a costuming stream another time.
Yes.
it just definitely reminds me of like doing research, like writing something and then running into like a specific fact and being like 2 hours later I'm in Wikipedia about, I don't know, how pipes work. Like
The bizarre deep dives of comic writing where you're trying to find out, like, when was this specific brand of cereal invented and made available in this one place?
oh god, the rabbit hole is so like this isn't really like I once Art and I were just like kind of writing a scene together just as like a fun thing, like more of a like little role play exercise than anything, and they had like a one-off question about something that I was at work at the time and I was like, give me a little bit, and then an hour later I came back. It was like, okay, so I've made a rough plan for what would be a historically feasible history of indoor plumbing for this entire setting with a consideration as to what types of metals and what type of metallurgy would be available to people commonly at the time.
Yes.
It like sometimes something just gets into your brain and won't let you go.
yeah, this is why I kind of applaud you guys when you talk about your stuff being like historically accurate and stuff. I'm like, this is why I can't write a webcomic like that, because it's too much for me. I have to write in a surreal dream world where the rules are as I make them up.
That's so freeing, though.
Yeah, like and that's I say this, but like I still am working like a fantasy setting. So like one of the other things that I was working on was like, okay, so I think given like how much necromancy is a thing, I think that like the kind of little like eyelid caps that morticians put on dead bodies to keep their eyes shut should be a fashion item.
Oh,
I adore that.
I love that yes.
Yes. See, surrealism is such a good choice though, Pim, because like I thought I could get out of this by doing a lot of contemporary work. Like a lot of my stuff is set kind of now, and one of the webcomic I just finished with my partner, Split Check, which is about it's about the restaurant industry, and it's set in Detroit, which is a city in America, that has like such a very specific culture that there were many times where I was like, okay, this character would not act this way because he is more familiar with the New York queer scene and is new to the Midwest and like would have very different fashion choices for winter because of the how cold it gets between Detroit and between like New York City are very different types of cold and very different snow amounts, and it's like, well, I guess I'll go die.
The main characters don't have clothes, so
you're all naked now. Deal with it.
Cartoon character logic.
Yeah, it's the guys who are wearing clothes who are standing out.
Yeah.
We really all need to get on that Donald Duck, Winnie the Pooh fashion trend of all of our characters just wear a shirt and no pants.
Yeah, I mean, like, I did literally do a short comic once where I was just like, you know what, fuck it. I have decided all the characters in this are going to be anthro bugs because I don't feel like drawing people and I don't feel like doing costume design, and that was how I got the comic done. So it was sometimes you just like, you know what, fuck it, we ball.
That is still super impressive though, because like every time I see people, like the furries are so impressive to me. I'm like, I could never draw any animal. I could only draw humanoids.
I love to draw a furry, but I also have to put them in clothes because I'm like that.
Oh no!
Like getting too close to Donald Duck situation.
Yeah. You have to figure out how to put a tail through pants.
Oh my god.
They've worked out the technology, I'm telling you.
That meme of how would a dog wear jeans?
Yes. Out of curiosity, did you all want to take questions while we're chatting, or did you want to wait until closer to the end? Because we have one if you want to talk about it.
Oh, I just saw it.
I don't have the chat open, but I'm game for anything really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Terabyte in chat asks, how do you all do research on different styles and cultures that aren't your own?
Carefully.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I would say whenever possible, I or Arden, like usually Arden, because they like do the bulk of our writing for stuff that like is like drawing from real life cultures. I would say whenever possible, if you have like friends or peers, like other writers or anyone who you know are like open to doing like sensitivity reads or just like letting them like bounce something off of you, that is like generally my go-to. Like I'm not like, to be clear, like absolutely not saying in the situation of like, oh, if you're a white person, like randomly ask your friends who aren't white, like, hey, is this cool? Like like
No.
never, do not do that.
Yeah.
But like for example, like some of our friends who like are Middle Eastern like also work in like games and comics writing and stuff, and specifically do like sensitivity consults and stuff, have been incredibly helpful for our writing and cultures that draw more from like kind of Arab inspired cultures and things like that. Outside of that, I would say like try to like just do as much research like from like first person sources as you can. Outside of that, I think it's like generally my go-to.
Yeah, especially with when you're trying to work in certain subsets of queer culture. Like I mentioned New York earlier, like one of the characters in Split Check was born and raised in New York City, and like that's not a culture that I have a lot of familiarity with outside of the internet. So a lot of that was like reading and talking to friends who like live in that area, and just reading a lot of like firsthand accounts and like knowing just media to check out by people from that specific area. Because like I grew up in Philadelphia, and the queer cultures are very different between those two cities.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, New York is kind of like several cities compressed into one, from what it seems like as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a lot.
Very mega city.
Yeah.
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 And I think...
Oh, sorry. You can go on.
I don't know. Yeah, I was just thinking as well. I think like sometimes like when it comes to writing things that like you don't have as much firsthand experience with, sometimes it is good to just like kind of gut check of like, is this the sort of thing that's like not to immediately be like, oh, be sure that you're like not appropriating, but I think it is useful to sort of gut check sometimes and be like, is this something that like I feel comfortable kind of putting out as someone who hasn't lived these experiences? Or like, for example, like there's plenty of like parts of the queer experience that I haven't directly lived, but I like feel personally like pretty, like I have a pretty solid understanding of it. But there are many things like intersection, like for example, like writing from the point of view of like a trans Black woman is something that I would much rather be like getting like very heavy like sensitivity reads and stuff for, if not just like basically like paying someone who has that lived experience to cover that side of things for me. Like I think especially in like when it comes to like writing within like marginalized groups, better safe than sorry.
There's also just I personally think on this subject, you have to also accept that there's gonna be the chance that you fuck up and you have to change it later. Like coming to peace with the fact that you may make a mistake no matter how much sensitivity reading and how much you research. There's still a chance you could fuck up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like as someone who is not white, like a lot of like specifically when talking about like other like racially marginalized communities, like a lot of people have in-ground biases they're not going to realize that sensitivity training or sensitivity readers would not catch, like just because they're not inside your own brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my webcomic, I do a bunch of stuff with like myths and things, and I've so far been using stuff that I like grew up with, so there's some like Chinese and Japanese stuff in there. And I received an ask like ages ago that somebody very kindly like typed out the story about Ara the Beautiful, and I was like, this is a very interesting story, and I was really happy that they like told me about it, and I tried to look it up because I was like, oh, maybe I can include it later, in my comic, but I was like, I don't know if I'm completely comfortable with doing that actually, because I don't come from this culture. I know nothing about this, and then when I tried to research it, it was like very hard to find, I guess. So I was like, I'm still undecided on what to do with that, but yeah.
How about you, Ashley?
I definitely agree with what was said earlier about like finding first-hand accounts. I've definitely fallen down some rabbit holes about like looking into, you know, particular time periods in other countries, whether it's for Margot with Obelisk, or I have a project on the back burner that has characters who are like butch and femme lesbians in the 50s, and some of them are some of them are from the Latino community. So there's like a big difference between what they're dealing with versus some of the other characters. And I've had a lot of like research rabbit holes about that, like finding specific like plays or poetry or things from even as late as the 80s, but just trying to find where the differences are between like what I would assume or what I believe, you know, what I would write straight off the top of my head versus, you know, what the reality was. And I also have my partner, Nanda, is often my like research buddy, so we do like R&D.
So this is interesting because it also falls kind of into our one of our other questions, in that how has your approach to character creation changed over time? If you've been doing comics before, quote unquote, coming out, did your own identity changing affect this? Just kind of in regards to how you research and create characters, really.
Yeah. I think I previous stated fanfiction stuff. Like, I was into that before I knew I was queer, so I think I was like going through that content, and I don't remember if I wrote stuff, but I was definitely like consuming queer content even before like I knew I was part of it. And after I sort of like realized I was like, oh, these themes actually do appear in things that I make already, and I can try and like lean into it more, I guess.
Yeah, I super relate to the feeling of like creating things that already like had at least like some level of like latent queerness before even really fully realizing yourself that it was coming from inside the house, so to speak. Yeah, I think like my approach to character creation is like, I think I have definitely gotten a lot more comfortable with making stuff like nastier, basically. When I think this is also partly a like DSMV symptom of having come up on Tumblr in the years that I did, but I used to have a lot more reservations about like what types of queer characters and what types of queer narratives it felt like okay or permissible to show or like even entertain the idea of like telling stories about. And I think that I knew I was trans from like a pretty early age, but I feel like growing into and accepting myself as like a queer weirdo took a lot longer, if that makes sense. And kind of like as a result, you're sorry.
Oh no, sorry, I was just agreeing.
But yeah, and like as a very direct result of kind of like basically just like doing the work and like kind of making more like friends like in real life, like my age, like people who were similar minded and like enthusiastic about like the process of creating art and things like that, I was able to like make characters who fell like much further from the beaten path, like characters that felt more like if I were like a person externally experiencing being like, yeah, this is like a type of character that I don't think that, for example, like a cis person, like not to be like super prescriptive about it, but like the type of characters that I would be more surprised like to not have come from a trans writer, if that makes sense. Like there's like just like certain nuances and certain like degrees of messiness where a lot of the time the like starting shot for that character kind of feels like something that's like a thought that you have while you are doing a lot of processing about gender and kind of like coming to grips with that. Like, I don't know, like, what am I... This is... I say all that, and then I'm about to bring up an author who, like, I have no idea whether or not they identify as queer, but, so, Tatsuki Fujimoto, the artist of Chainsaw Man, also, like, before Chainsaw Man, did a comic called Fire Punch.
I've read that.
It's...
Yes.
I love Fire Punch so fucking much. It is still my favorite of Fujimoto's works. But specifically, like, there's a character in it who, like, talking around this, like, vaguely to try to avoid spoilers, but essentially, like, they're a character who, like, is trans, but he cannot medically transition. Like, he is just locked into existing, like, without hormones or surgery or anything forever, and it feels like, I don't know, just the way it is handled feels like such a particularly delicate thing that I literally was, like, messaging one of my friends at the time, was like, dude, not to, like, be putting on my tinfoil hat, but Fujimoto?
Yeah, I was very surprised at how it was handled too, that it was like, I don't know if I could go as far to say it's like respected in a way, but it's not like, it's not a character that's shit on for...
Yeah, like the character's pain feels like it has the right amount of space and gravity without it being just like a big, like, pity party kind of thing, and he's still like his own full character in his own right.
Yeah.
He's like such a big thing. So like that kind of, and also just because that kind of thing of like, oh, this character has like an objectively like miserable existence, but is still like completely inarguably queer, is like that kind of thing that I really fucking like, and like that I really enjoy both reading and writing, that sort of thing. And I don't know, I think it's something that I definitely could not have copped to, like, even like 5 or I don't know, 10 years ago, like, even though I've been out for longer than that.
Yeah.
Like, how old is that? I never actually looked into that. I just know it came before Chainsaw Man.
Off the dome, I'm not sure. Okay, it says that, oh, sorry. Fire Punch was serialized from 2016 to 2018. And I don't know, it also, like, really hits a type of way, like, knowing that, like, Japan, like, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Japan, like, still has a law in place where you can't legally change your gender marker before getting surgery that renders you medically sterile. So it's
That
just
is
sort of like
still true, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just sort of a thing where, like, it feels like a very considered and thoughtful perspective, like, just in a way that makes me, like, really pause, but also, like, it's really cool, and I fucking love that character, because I love that he still, like, has the, like, interiority to kind of suck ass as a dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no spoilers, but it's oh.
Yeah, that comic is so nasty and trashy.
I need to read it now.
Yeah, it is a bit of a rougher read in several senses than Chainsaw Man in general, but I love it a lot. Like, it really is like just like trashy exploitation-y type pulp, but also with the good old Fujimoto heart of making me really sad and think a lot about movies at the end.
Yeah, I think I started reading that off the premise of like someone this is going off topic. Does Super Eye Patch Wolf, I think, talked about on YouTube, talked about the comic briefly, just like kind of memeing on it, and I was like, that actually sounds like a really scary and cool premise, and then I went and read it and I was like, I'm different now.
Because I think, like, the concept of, like, what if you were suffering forever, like, both describes a lot of characters in that, and, like, a kind of, like, I think common thread in, like, queer experience, and also kind of a queer subconscious fear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
Mhm. I definitely feel you on like the needing to give yourself permission, or like finding that ability to like get really messy with your work again. Like I've absolutely felt that post Tumblr. And I feel like it's still in a lot of ways something that I'm shaking off. I had sort of between that and the fan fiction thing, I had kind of a trajectory of like, even after I came out, I had a period of like, I was very into like the Vegeta of whatever show I was in, and then eventually realized I could make that character a woman, and that changed my life forever.
Fuck yes.
Excellent.
That was my like initial trajectory for sure.
Yeah, I think especially just the thing of like, I think like for a certain like cohort of people who like came out and also like were experiencing queerness online, it feels like sometimes there's kind of like a second shedding of the skin you have to do as a writer, because I imagine like it, like especially like being a gay woman, I cannot imagine like how frustrating it gets, like the way that like lesbianism and lesbian art gets pigeonholed in a lot of online communities, and like very prescriptive and like expecting like a certain thing, and God help you if anything you're doing like falls outside of what people think you're going to do as a lesbian.
Yeah, I mean I don't remember if I've ever really talked about this anywhere before, but a part of why I started Obelisk was out of spite.
Hell yeah.
It was because I love vampire movies, I love horror movies, I love horror stories in general, and there are quite a few lesbian vampire things out there, but they are all very much like of a type, and that type is like very feminine, like lesbian vampire killers, kind of femme fatale-y or like predatory lesbian, and I was like, where are all of the butches? Where are they?
Where are you hiding them? Bring them back.
Give them to me. I have to do it all myself.
I feel kind of similarly in that, Ashley, in that my webcomic is also a spite webcomic. I love a lot of so one of my favorite tropes is like when there's like a evil fucked up fighting ring underground, like Baki and Kengan Ashura kind of stuff, where you've got a whole guy museum of weird men with different fighting styles. And I was like, but like why aren't they kissing? They're all here and none of them are kissing.
How could they not be kissing?
They need to be kissing.
Yeah, God, you're so right. Like, literally, like, what are you doing putting all these, like, sweaty, half-dressed men in a room together if not to have at least some of them make out a little? Like,
exactly.
God.
This is like, starting out in, like, Team Fortress 2 fanfiction, that was, like, all guys, and I feel like every TF2 fanfic is not straight. None of it is straight.
Like even
TF2 fandom is literally like the world of yaoi that you were describing earlier, Nero.
Yaoi worlds.
Oh God, I 100% like I was cosplaying the Scout at conventions like before I even came out as trans. It runs deep.
That just reminds me that I literally tried to do that. I did such a bad Scout cosplay. That was my first one.
I honestly feel like Scout cosplays are like up there with L and that kind of thing, where it's like there's a certain like level of like effort that is just like acceptable. It's fine, you're there to hang.
Headset and t-shirt.
Yep. But yeah, I don't know, like I don't know, I think like making stuff like, especially like making queer art like fueled at least partly by spite is such a real thing. I think again like also a part of like kind of embracing identity, because like even like once you kind of get past the initial like cork stuck in the hole of the brain of like, oh I have to like let myself make gay art, it's like I have to let myself make gay art that is like the type of shit I want to see, that even if like no one else is making this, so I better start fucking putting some food on the table.
Yeah.
There's like this trajectory of I need to make gay art, and then it becomes I want to make weird gay art.
Precisely.
Yeah, I think when I grew up it was like I never really saw myself in fiction, and that like wasn't a huge problem for me, but then like after I sort of came out to myself, I was kind of like, oh, I can do this, I can make stuff. So like speaking of bad Tumblr influences, there was like a period of time on Tumblr that it was very like ace-phobic, kind of. And I sort of like didn't examine that as I was there in my teenage years, and then afterwards I sort of realized it, and I was like, well, I'm gonna make the content that says you don't have to do the romance.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just allowing yourself the space to like write characters that are expressing like gender or orientation or lack of either of those categories is such a freeing thing, but it also really takes a lot of legwork once you start getting into the weeds with it. Like, it feels like a lot of stuff you have to unlearn.
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely. When you guys said earlier that it was like, oh, it's a point that when you have characters that are like less designed and have like mine don't have clothes, I was like, oh, yeah. When you point that out, I think, yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about like, I don't know, I think so like one really nice thing is that like I think that there is a tremendous reward in allowing yourself to get as weird and queer with like the designing and writing as you want. Like, for example, up until very, very recently, we were planning that Arden was going to have their name on the vow like under a pen name, just because they have dealt with a lot of like actual like direct harassment online in the past, like being a queer writer and creative person in general. Like, it shit sucks. I don't have to like go super into it, but like basically for like emotional safety reasons, they were like, I would just rather do a pen name. But we finally got to do our first in-person convention in Montreal last month, and just like people really were excited about it in a way that made us both realize like, yeah, like it's fine. Like, we can just go for it. Like, we can go for broke. Like, I think one of the biggest rewards is once you start really like putting your whole ass out there and showing people what you have, how much people will respond to that. Because like you never really know, like, until you fully put it out there, like how many other people have the exact same taste as you and were waiting this whole time to see the weird queer freako art that of your own specific stripe that you were working on.
Yeah, and especially like when the characters involved are like something that you feel very passionately about, such as being like, you know, part of a spite webcomic, or like something that feels like much closer to yourself. It's really nice to see people connect with those, because it also feels like, you know, they're kind of connecting with you in a way.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. It's very reassuring in a way, where it's like you have these moments of putting something very personal into your work, and like I try and remind myself whenever I have like creative insecurity, like if I like this, there's definitely going to be at least one other person out there, probably more than one, who's into it the same way.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely, like, comments are very encouraging. Like, you get very sweet comments sometimes from people. Yeah.
I've gotten on more than one occasion, I've gotten some comments that are like specifically thanking me for like my portrayal of butch women and lesbians, and it's always so heartwarming. It's like, oh, we're out there.
We're out there, we exist.
Yeah, absolutely. God, this is honestly reminding me like I need to like be better about just like commenting on and like reaching out to artists and stuff whose work I enjoy more, because like I've definitely like felt that as well, like on both ends of it, of being like, oh, this like character like expressing gender and like sexuality in a particular way like feels so good to see. Like, I don't know, it hits so well.
Maybe it's corny, but I've started sending emails to authors whose work I like, and I just send them. Yeah, like it's just sending a direct email. It's just like, I like this. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. I love that. One time I got someone randomly emailed me fan art, and it like made my week.
Oh, that's so good.
Normalize emailing the people who you think are cool on the internet.
Yeah, I love that. I got some friendly emails to write, I think. I don't know. Yeah, like it just you saying like someone emailing you fan art reminds me a bit of like, I don't know, it was like waxing a little bit in my brain the other day thinking about like kind of how like older websites used to feel and how much easier it sort of felt to just kind of like reach out to people unprompted in that way. And I think like for various factors like that's been lost a little bit, but it kind of makes it feel all the more meaningful when people do reach out directly, I guess. Because it's like, oh, you're breaking through the barriers of all the like crust that is built up on online today to express something very heartfelt.
Yeah. Like, even if you don't do direct, like, emails and such, like, I watch a lot of, I guess, reviews on YouTube about things, and that's, ended up in me, like, I will make comics, like, influenced by that. I will make comics basically talking about why a piece of media is, like, important to me, and recently, like, the author of that media, like, saw the thing I made, and I was like, oh, people, this will help. This is good.
Yeah, honestly, I love that. Like, that sounds like a really, like, fun way to kind of, like, both review and journal and make a piece of art simultaneously. Like, I imagine, like, for the person who, like, made that and saw it, that probably felt, like, incredible for them. That sounds really cool.
It's very fun. Join me.
Yeah, it's time to stop just silently logging things on Letterboxd and start journaling about it.
Review content.
I know there was in the not to go too off topic, but in the co-op journal for June there was someone who did a couple of different I think it was 2 or 3, I think it was 3 different kind of comic reviews of stuff they had read that month, and I was like, ooh, I kind of want to do that.
Yeah, that is a good idea. I honestly, I'm probably gonna like jot that down.
Yeah.
Draw your little Sona.
Plus, then like it's, I like to see how people draw other like artists' characters in their own styles, because I feel like it really reflects a lot about the one who is drawing and like what they connect with in that character. Like every time like there's certain characters of mine where people like really highlight a particular feature because it's something they like, and I'm like, ooh, I didn't even realize that was something that I was drawing unconsciously.
Yeah, it's a really great way of like both seeing how other people would interpret the character, but also it kind of gives you perspective on your own art and like your habits. I love it.
Yeah,
Oh,
fan art is such a
You
fun
love
time.
these noses? I'll make them larger just for you.
That's the shit I love to hear.
I get noses and eyebrows a lot.
I mean, they're great features. They can never be too emphasized.
True.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Pim, you were saying?
What was I saying? Sorry. I completely forgot.
I got too excited to yell about noses.
No, I completely forgot what I was talking about. Can you remind me?
Oh, I don't know what you were gonna say, so.
Oh no, it's lost.
Something about the reviewing, like writing about like other people's stuff, maybe? Or, like review comics about stuff. I'm not sure.
If it ever comes back to me, I'll say it.
It's gone
Just
to the
slam
wind
the buzzer.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that, like, honestly, like, that kind of, like, not to be putting on my, like, cap and gown and, like, using vocabulary, but, like, the transformative kind of, like, process of, like, creating fan work, or even just, like, thinking about, like, creating kind of a response in the kind of, like, review space can be really fun. Like, because for like even just like when I was looking at the questions and stuff for these panels beforehand and kind of like going through my Goodreads list of comics that I've read and enjoyed, like it's kind of making me like reconsider and reassess the things that I really enjoy or that really work for me, specifically in the queer comics that sort of jumped out to me. I don't know, like it's really fun to kind of like reprocess something post the original like reading and thinking about it and like kind of incorporating it into your brain.
Yeah, I think I do a lot of that in my head where I will like look at content that I enjoy and I'll try to be like, why did I like this though? And I think I make a lot of comics about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly like a really good way to grow and learn and like kind of build muscle as an artist, frankly, because I don't think there's anything that you stand to lose, especially like thinking more critically and thinking productively in that way about art that speaks to you or even that doesn't speak to you, because I feel like I've gotten some good insight from like even reading like gay or trans comics that did not really end up working for me, like just having the thought of like, okay, but why didn't this land? Like, why does this, like, what would I have done? Like, even that, I still think of it as a kind of, like, taking your brain to the gym.
Yeah.
I think the what would I have done part is really interesting also, because you totally could, like, do that afterwards, like, take it as inspiration and be like, oh, I'll do my version of this idea.
Yeah, it's a really great exercise just to, like, sit with not only like, okay, I didn't like this or I didn't like this element of the story, but also like why and what you would have done differently. Like, it makes you consider what you might do differently in your own work.
Yeah, it was funny when I did like a decent amount of planning for once with my current webcomic, because usually so much of it is like off the cuff, but this time I was like, no, I'm gonna think about things a little more. So I did a lot of like mapping and like here's the things I like, here's the characters I like, and here's the things here's the books I don't like, here's the characters I don't like. Let me like map why each one works and why each one doesn't. And that's like kind of how I ended up working with character design for my recent stuff, is just figuring out like, okay, here's all the traits I like, I'm gonna put them in one character. This guy's got freckles, he's got a mullet, he's got big ass eyelashes. He's a Dorito.
Yeah.
The perfect man.
The perfect man.
Grown in a lab, just a perfect slab of guy.
I think people kind of forget that kind of thing where like, and I know it was one of the questions we had on here, which we kind of went over earlier, but it's like ultimately your characters are kind of for you. So like I always feel bad when people feel like they have to make a certain kind of character, especially in comics, to kind of fill like a quota, because they're like, well, I have to have this kind of character and this kind of character, and I don't want them to be wrong.
Yeah. That kind of stuff just, I feel like it never lands like as well as it would have if it was like coming from a place of like not feeling just concerned about that, I guess.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine who was she wanted to have kind of a set of like trans men and trans mass characters in one of her comics, and she kind of put the designs together, and I was talking to her about it, and like at the end she just ended up not feeling passionate about it at all. She was like, I'm just doing these because my patrons keep asking. And I was like, well, then don't do it. Trans man, I'm telling you, you don't have to do it at all.
Yeah, like getting a bunch of pressure from people who are like, we want to see you draw this, is possibly like one of the worst like things to be like your one and only motivating force. Like, yeah, it's very for people who are like encouraging you about it. But I think that's like something that I still see sometimes. Like, I don't know, this one artist I follow got an ask from someone who was like, oh, do you draw like any trans man with like cis woman content? Like, your art has so much like cool representation, and that would be really great to see. And he handled it with an incredible amount of grace. But I think I might have like come at someone with a katana if they asked me to draw like a particular configuration of genders and used the word for representation. Because it's just like, man, that's not like what making art is about. I think at the end of the day, I don't know.
Yeah, and it sucks that it's such a trap, because representation can be extremely important, but it not as like a particular quota that you like need to fill. Like a lot of times, like the things that people want from you, they can find from other creators, especially in comics. Like there's almost 1,000 people in the co-op. Like someone out there will be drawing the thing that you're looking for.
Yeah, precisely. Like, I don't know, I think I'm glad that it feels like things like are moving away from like tokenism or any kind of like that sort of thing being incorporated, but the sort of like pressure in like in that sense like still exist to some degree, like especially like if you are like a vocally like marginalized artist of any type. Like I've known, like for example, like one of my friends who's a trans woman comic artist in game dev, like got a lot of people like kind of really overstepping boundaries in like just outright asking her to write in like certain types of characters, like because they wanted to see that. And it's like, man, you can literally just like look for stuff on your own time instead of like telling someone to do unpaid like labor and put it in their comic for you.
Yeah, or you could do the spite thing that we did, which is just do it yourself.
Just make it yourself.
What you want.
Like this character clearly already like halfway exists in your mind. You do the comic. And then it like adds to the sum total of comics about like trans women characters. Like it's never gonna be like a net loss like for more people to make art about stuff that speaks to them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I don't know, was this, my brain is scattering a bit. Was this said earlier where you said it was a concern of, like, doing, like, the perfect representation when you make a character? Like, they have to be, like, a good example of whatever orientation they are?
I think honestly, I think that definitely like does factor into it. I don't remember like off the top of my head if that was something that like specifically like someone I know had been through recently, but the pressure is definitely there. I think of a thing of like creating characters for diversity's sake often like goes hand in hand with that sort of internally like created pressure. I think of like, okay, well, like I'm bringing this character in to like round things out, so I really have to like hit the nail on the head, and that can just kind of like create a negative feedback spiral pretty quickly, I feel like.
Yeah, because I remember you guys talking about like making messy stories and characters. Definitely, like I feel like whenever that comes up, also there's also the thing where people are just like for instance, when like Crazy Rich Asians the movie came out, people were criticizing it a lot for like this and that, and being like, the only reason you're doing this is because this is the only movie that's come out recently with like representation for Asian people, so you're immediately like throwing all these criticisms on it, but it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah, it's very much that pressure of like the less representation a group has, the more that like that one thing will carry the weight of everyone's expectations. It does definitely tie in for me too with that idea of like the pressure to do something unproblematic or like pushing back and wanting to make a messy story. Like in a lot of ways I feel like I'm still figuring out how to tell a story that's self-indulgent just for me. So the idea of being told to like include a bunch of other things when I haven't even fully figured that out yet is like, how?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a very like weird mindset to be bringing to someone else's art, I feel like. But I don't know, like I have faith, as with all things, that I think a lot of the time that kind of like questioning when it's coming from someone outside of like, hey, can you put in a character that's like this or that, is sort of like coming from a like sort of greenness. That is my optimist's outlook, and that like maybe like genuinely maybe over time they'll be like, oh, I can just like write a character that's queer. I want them to be queer.
Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of times, like, from what I've witnessed anyway, people generally don't mean it from a place of, like being mean. They're used to seeing, like, a variety, and they, like, want to see that, and maybe they don't quite get yet that what you want to do is very different than what they are expecting you to do, if that makes sense.
I think there's also a difference in, like, when people ask that of, like, I don't know, like very famous productions and like shows and stuff, and the difference between that and asking like indie creators.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, like Crazy Rich Asians, like I think there definitely is a thing of like when something comes out and it's like standing sort of alone in its field, regardless of the size or scale of the project, it's going to be subject to way more scrutiny than like something like that cues much more air quote mainstream audience would. But like that being disproportionate like that sometimes is disproportionate to the scale of the project. So sometimes like smaller indie things can get as much kind of blowback and panopticon eye gaze on them as like a blockbuster movie can, which is rough.
Yeah, I think honestly especially in webcomics, the kind of flattening, I suppose you could call it, of a lot of webtoons are kind of made by teams, and people kind of put them on the same level as like full animated productions or like movies, and they kind of think that like they are kind of the same when it's not.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's like, no, this is a team of like less than 10, probably less than 5 people who are getting paid basically in webtoons company script.
God, yeah. Sorry, Ashley, you're gonna say something?
Oh, you're good. I was just agreeing.
I'm sorry if we keep interrupting you, by the way.
No, you're fine.
Feel free to hoot and holler and yell and shout.
You are totally fine. I have a lot of, I'm an art teacher outside of my own comics, and I have a lot of like teen students in art who are very like looking at that kind of webtoon culture. And like it does make me happy that they're realizing how tough it is, like with the amount, like the workload and everything. But I'm hopeful that we're moving away from, you know, people expecting too much of artists.
Yeah, and I think like just to know also that even webtoons are not made. Some webtoons aren't made by like a single person. Like when I first saw webtoons, I was like, this is so polished. How do they do this?
Yeah, it's because it's like 7 people.
Yeah.
They have the manga assistant system.
Yeah,
it's funny because like I think I started like probing around the internet like towards I think the tail end of like the great webcomics moment, quote unquote. But I still remember like the feeling of like seeing a lot of webcomics that had like similar, if not like on the same level as like webtoon level polish, but it would generally be like 1 or maybe 2 people tops. And characteristic of a lot of those projects that had so much polish going into them is that the ones that were being made by 1 person generally did not finish, because like that's too, like unless you have lucked into making it your full-time job, it's like that's too much to take on. So I'm glad that like with the webtoon model at least like there's more of a division of labor for sure, because like there are just the so many webcomics I can think of off the dome that I loved that just sort of quietly filtered out of the world.
Yeah, I think people sometimes don't know that comics are a lot of labor.
Yeah, or sometimes people are just very quick at certain things, and like not,
yeah,
like it's no one's like particular fault, but some people are very, like, for example, I hate coloring. You ask me to color like a comic, I want to lay on the ground. I want to turn into dust. But some people really, really love coloring their work, and they'll be very quick at it and can like flat a page in like 30 minutes, and it takes me twice as long to do that, and I'm grumbling and groaning the whole time.
Yeah, I think like definitely the only reason I can keep up with my webcomic is I'm only doing the parts that I like doing. Like I don't have any color, and my like nothing is very detailed. So that's the only reason I can get it out in like a timely manner.
Yeah, mine is, it's black and white, it's grayscale. I'm only drawing the kind of freaky, weird little men that I want to draw.
Yeah, if it, like drawing the type of like beef dudes, like you can 3D print this man. I can draw him with my eyes closed. I know him.
Being deeply in your own niche.
It's fun to be in your own niche, though, you know, like, you can be on your own bullshit and no one can stop you.
I feel like my version of that is weird page layouts. Just doing some weird, skipping the thumbnailing, just drawing some weird compositions. Put some squiggles on the page.
I do not thumbnail for my webcomic.
Oh, terrifying.
Sometimes it's bad because I'll do like a whole page and I'll be like, this looks bad, and I'll have to scrap it. But you know.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like, comics, like I've said this before, but it's like comics is about like working smarter, not harder. So I think like whatever gets a page finished and in a state where you're like, yeah, here it is, I'm ready to share this with people, is like process works.
Yeah, like especially like in web comics, like people just want to read the thing that you're doing. So like sometimes it's fine to just not put a background in every panel. Like you can deal with it. It's okay.
Oh man, I skip backgrounds so often when I can thematically.
Yeah. See, it's interesting because your work, you've kind of incorporated it as part of your style, and it's not like it ever feels empty or anything. Like every line you make feels very exacting and on purpose.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like
It's
the way
good.
you lay out space in your comics, like it feels very deliberate. Like there's never a feeling of like, didn't draw a background on this one. Like it works like as a full composition.
Oh, okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief.
It reminds me a lot of like early 2000s and very like 90s shoujo manga, which also kind of utilized a lack of like kind of utilizing white space and the way that people use like spot black to guide eyes across a page or to isolate certain figures.
I do love shoujo. I feel like I should read it again. I
yeah.
read when I was in like middle school.
Yeah, there's still a lot of bangers. Apparently they're making a new anime for Ranma half. So the classics keep on coming, baby.
Ranma, also very queer.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Really.
Like Ranma is like up there, I think, with like Oran as well for like extremely definitive #gender shoujos.
Oran was so big for me. The main character.
Speaking of peak character designs, really. Ooh, I didn't know that about Rama 1/2. That's great.
Yeah, I actually somehow, like, despite like being in the right time and place, I just completely like missed the boat on ever like reading or watching it. But like the shockwaves that has sent through gay culture are felt for sure.
Absolutely. All right, well, we are at the hour and a half mark. Did you want to wrap things up, or did any of you have anything else you want to talk to relating to kind of queerness and character creation and how it reflects on ourselves and our audiences and our weird little stories?
Not especially, but I just spotted a question if we want to do that really quickly.
Sure.
Sure.
I think somebody said, hold on, it's long. It often feels like you have to do art digitally rather than hand-drawn. Any tips for those who don't have the means for doing digital art if they want to pursue hand-drawn over digital?
It's kind of out of the scope of this panel, but I do have a couple of tips. Really, the big one is you use your entire arm for traditional art. You know, like use your whole arm and work big. You'll be faster that way.
Oh, I thought you were gonna do like a thing so that you don't get carpal tunnel.
I mean,
That's my tip.
Yeah.
That too, but also just using like your whole shoulder and your whole arm. You'll be faster that way.
Also, just practice. A lot of it, all of my stuff is traditional, and I don't feel like it's any slower for me. But it's also a matter of I don't really enjoy working digitally, so that would make that slower.
Yeah, and like
just follow your heart.
Yeah. Like traditional art has its own set of like shortcuts and secrets too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, honestly, like, when it comes to, especially, like, if you're sort of, like, more in the starting period, I genuinely kind of think it's better to come to grips, like, with, like, working in traditional medium. Like, you get more familiar and, like, more, like, connected to your mark making in ways. Like, I have been working digitally for years and years on this comic book, and I can feel a lot of muscles atrophying that probably would not be if I was drawing it by hand, but also I don't have it in me to do a 300-page comic by hand right now.
Yeah. So it's very funny with like so I was doing like kind of traditional stuff like painting, inking, all of that until like kind of 2018, 2019 when I got an iPad and I moved entirely to digital. But now the couple times when I've done traditional art afterwards, I kind of feel like I've gotten better because I recognize the fear in that if I fuck up, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So now I'm very exacting when I do things like I do a lot of Posca art with like paint markers and stuff, and it's like I'm very careful about what I do now.
Yeah, I think Control Z definitely kind of trains you differently.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and also just in terms of stuff like line like correction and things, like there are some like times where that can be genuinely pretty useful, but learning how to make a like bold and like clear communicative mark by hand, like on paper, will like transfer no matter what medium you're working in.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. And also kind of circles back to character design there, and that like there's something to be said for kind of just sitting down with a little notebook away from the internet and away from anything digital and just kind of coming up.
You know, when it's more formal, like how do they express themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very fun to kind of do that in little thumbnail or like almost gesture drawing kind of ways that it helps like pare things down too for comics. I learned very quickly with Obelisk that putting all of the details and patterns in my character's clothing that I was seeing in actual historical dress would drive me insane.
No.
So you really learn to like imply things in a way that's, you know, you still can tell that this is a fancy outfit, but maybe not with something that'll take 1 million years and my arm will fall off.
Yeah,
Absolutely. An artist whose work I really like, Celine Loop, recently like posted on her Patreon about keeping like a pen, like starting and keeping a small like pen only sketchbook, because like what you were saying here about like how much that like forces you to like really like focus like on clarity of line and like shape and like character design, I think is honestly I probably will start doing it myself, like just because like there's like I know the question asker like mentioned like not really having access to digital art, but like if you have access to a pen and a sketchbook, you already have the tools to create like work that honestly would be pretty difficult to replicate faithfully in a digital medium. Like there's a lot of work I've had to do just trying to recapture the like texture and feel of certain handmade marks on paper in digital art.
Mm-hmm.
But,
definitely as somebody who's not great at colors, I feel like digitally I still don't understand how paints work, but I can do it traditionally a lot better.
Yeah, that's the medium restriction. It's interesting how it can kind of affect exactly how you design your characters in that way, with either like I don't want to draw these patterns, or you know, I'm not going to use color for this. There's a lot that goes into character design. Like it's one of those things that like to me I find it endlessly fascinating, especially as someone who like I don't do turnarounds or anything like some people like really get into planning. Like only recently did I get pure ref and start like actually creating like little reference folders for characters. Before then everything was just based on vibes.
God, you were so brave.
Do you make boards?
I feel like when you're finally putting it down on the page, at least for me, I'll do all this research, and then when I am actually drawing it, I will go with things based on vibes. I'll like change something because it looks cooler in that moment, and that is absolutely valid.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think
Or you
that's
change
like
it because it looks gayer.
That
Literally.
too. That
Yeah,
too.
I feel like a big part of the research even is like just like putting the information in your brain so that like even if you don't have it on perfect crystal clear recall, being able to synthesize stuff from what you've learned is still really good. So like you have the stuff that's still in your brain. It's just that when you're going based on vibes, you're going based on more informed vibes than if you hadn't gone down like the costuming rabbit hole for hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very like you have to learn the rules to break them, sort of thing.
It also, when you talk about that, it also reminds me of like when you design a character. I don't know if you guys also do this where you like draw basically the same thing but you change like a little bit, and you just do that like 50 times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, until you figure out which like small detail you want changed.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, feeling out the shape of the character, like basically doing the like Dark Souls similar face modification.
Yeah.
I have a lot of like, I'll have this vibe in my head of what I know this character must look like, but I have to draw them a million times until it comes out right, and then I know what they look like.
Yeah, like I get that totally. Like you know what you want them to look like, but you have to figure out how to draw them, like how to draw that exact set of features, like in a way where like the marks like are what you want them to take the shape of.
Make it cool, make it gay.
The words to live by.
Those aren't words to live by, though.
Make it a shirt.
All right, since we're at an hour and a half, I think we're probably good to wrap up. Thank you three for joining me. This has been great. I love doing these.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Hell yeah! Like I'm glad this time worked out for everybody.
Yeah, this is really fun.
Do you want to go around and plug your pluggables one last time so people know where they can find you? Like I already put everyone's like websites and such in the YouTube description, but
Yeah, sure. I'm Yeehaw Pim on Tumblr. My webcomic is We Go Together, and if you look through my like pin post and stuff, there's stuff about a graphic novel I'm working on here.
I'm Julian Cormac. I'm Feral Royal on most social medias. My graphic novel that I'm making with Arden, who is at Sproutella on most social medias, is The Vow. If you're interested in any of the talk we're having about making weird, dark, messy queer stuff, partly out of spite, partly because you gotta make stuff gayer to make it cooler, you can sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter launches by going to tinyurl.com/crowdfundthevow. I also just have links to that all over my social media right now. But yeah.
I'm Ashley again, and I make Obelisk. You can find it at obeliskcomic.com. Chapter 3 is starting next month, and you can get the ebook versions of chapters 1 and 2 on my Itch.io shop. All of my social medias and my Itch.io are at Draculing, which is like Dracula but with an ing at the end.
Hell yeah. And I'm Nero. You can find my webcomic at uv.itsnero.com. It's Nero pretty much everywhere. I love to talk about making evil little freaks every day. Making gay evil little freaks.
Amen, brother.
All right, so that's it for tonight. Again, thank you all for joining me. Say goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.